So today we are going to continue our discussion with respect to confusion matrix. As I stated in the last session, confusion matrix can be extended for more than two classes. We had a discussion about confusion matrix and the various performance metrics. Those can be derived based on this confusion matrix, right? But in the last session, we have seen confusion matrix for two classes of the binary classification. So let's extend the concept of confusion matrix today so that we can accommodate more than two classes as well. So if you look at the screen, we are having one example. So what we are having here is, we want to recognize the numbers, digits 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on, right? So this is a problem of optical character recognition. So we are having 10 classes here. How many classes we have? 10 classes. And what are those classes? One class representing one digit, 0 to 9 are the classes, right? And we are having number of samples. Those we are going to test for every class. So if you look at this confusion matrix, what we have here is, we are having a matrix with the dimension 9 by 9, sorry, 10 by 10. Why 10 by 10? Because we are having 10 classes, 0 to 9. So on the, or we are having the rows representing the actual class and the column representing the predicted class. So if you look at here, if my actual class is 0 and if it is predicted as 0, we said that it is true positive. So 0 actual and 0 predicted. So there are 97 samples. Right? 0 actual class and 0 is the predicted class. So we are having 97 such samples. If I look at another class 1, so actual class is 1 and predicted class is 1. So 98 samples are being correctly classified. So this is how we can prepare a confusion matrix if we are having more than two classes. So we talked about these are the true positives. That means whatever is my actual label 0 and it has been predicted as 0, so true positive. So remaining are the true negatives, all classes. So if my digit 0 is being classified in one of the other classes other than 0, then those are the misclassifications for this digit 0. Correct? So 97 times it is correctly classified. Remaining times, whatever may be my count or test samples, remaining times it has been classified with as some other digit. So these are the misclassifications for this class. So based on such kind of a confusion matrix also, it is possible for us to assess the performance of our classifier. So this is a multi-class classification problem wherein we are having more than two classes. So in this particular example, we are having 10 classes. If I am having 10 classes in my confusion matrix, size of my confusion matrix would be 10 by 10. Okay, and if you look at this diagonal, what this diagonal represents? This diagonal actually represents the correctly classified samples, the number of correctly classified samples. Am I correct? Are you getting me?
Yes, ma'am.
May I proceed? May I proceed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I would like to let you know that if I I'm not having classified any of the digits, then I may have the one more class. I may have, not always, but depending on the need, I may have one more class that is having the class label R, and that is the rejection. So reject option. What it means, reject option, if I am having one sample that is presented to my system, and if that sample is not being classified as any of these classes, 10 classes, then I may say that this has been classified as the rejection. So whatever may be, suppose I am presenting, say for example, the alphabet A. So alphabet A is not a digit. So I want to reject that. So I may add one more class here, that is the rejection. So whatever is the character that is being presented to the system, if it does not belong to any of the required classes 0 to 9, 10 classes, then I may have one more class here, and that is the rejection option, and that is treated as one more class, reject class. So I may have additionally this additional class if required, depending on whatever is my problem statement. Right? So I hope you must have understood the concept. May I proceed? May I proceed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So let's proceed to the performance metrics for unsupervised clustering. So we have talked about the performance measures with respect to supervised learning. So under supervised learning, we have two categories of the algorithms, and those are regression algorithm and the classification algorithm. So we talked about the performance metrics for regression, and we have seen the absolute error and sum of squared error that would be used to compute the performance or to assess the performance of regression kind of algorithms. Whereas for classification, we have seen the concept of confusion matrix, and we derived various performance measures to evaluate the performance of our classifier. Now, as we have mentioned earlier, we are having unsupervised learning algorithms as well. And the most popular under unsupervised learning is the algorithm called as clustering, right? So we are just looking at how the performance of the clustering algorithms is being measured. So we know, just recall back what is unsupervised clustering approach. So given such kinds of input data, right, we are having such kind of input data, unlabeled data, so we are having only the X, we do not know Y, right? So we are having only the data provided which is unlabeled, we do not know the labels, and what we are going to do is, based on some kind of similarity in between the samples, we are going to group that data together. So if we apply some clustering algorithm in such kind of a data, then it is possible for us to come up with the number of clusters. So in one cluster, whatever samples we are having, those are of similar kind, right? Because we are using some criteria, and that criteria will help us to group the data points. Those are very similar. So these data points are grouped together, these data points are grouped together, and these data points are grouped together. And this is how we are able to cluster our data in 3 clusters, 3 groups, right? So this is what the concept of clustering is. Now, if I want to evaluate the performance of such kind of clustering algorithms, then there should be some performance metric. So we are having 2 performance metrics for assessing the performance of clustering algorithms, and those are known as the intra-cluster distance and inter-cluster distance. There are several other performance metrics as well, but we are going to focus upon only two, just to introduce how, or just to let you know how the performance is being assessed for clustering algorithms. Okay, so two such measures are intra-cluster distance and inter-cluster distance. So what we mean by that? Let us see first intra-cluster distance. So this measure actually represents how close each sample within each cluster is to every other sample in its cluster. So these samples are being grouped together. These samples are being grouped together, and these samples are being grouped together. So intra-cluster distance means how close these individual samples in a cluster are with respect to every other sample in its cluster. So how close these samples are with respect to one another. That is called as intra-cluster distance. Distance of the samples from one another within that cluster itself. Intra-cluster, within that cluster itself. So this is one of the performance metrics. So we find out the distances of these samples from one another, and based on this distance measure we can conclude or we can come up with some insight. So this is called as intra-cluster distance. So we are bothered about the distance between the samples within the same cluster. Okay. The next performance metric is inter-cluster distance. Inter-clusters. So what we mean by inter-cluster distance now? Obviously it is distance between two clusters. So how close each cluster of samples is to other cluster of samples. So how close these clusters are. So let me tell you, in such approaches, whenever we come up with the clusters are having one centroid, right? So finding the distance between two clusters, meaning finding the distance between two centroids of these clusters, right? So it is possible to find out how close each cluster is with another cluster. So if we compute such a distance, right, among all the different clusters, then we say that it is inter-cluster distance. And by making use of these two parameters, or by making use of these performance metrics, it is possible to assess the performance of our clustering algorithm. So usually the models that produce relatively small intra-cluster distances and relatively large inter-cluster distances are evaluated as good. I'll repeat, models those actually are producing small intra-cluster distances. That means if the distance between two samples in the same cluster is small, but the distance between two clusters is large, then such kind of a model is preferred, right? So models that produce relatively small intra-cluster distances and relatively large inter-cluster distances are evaluated as good. So if I am having 2-3 models, then whichever model is satisfying these kinds of criteria as far as performance is considered, I will pick that model. Right? I hope you must have understood. If you have any doubt, please let me know.
Ma'am, can you go with one example?
Yes. Yes. So let us try to describe one example. And that example is like customer segmentation. Customer segmentation. So what we mean by customer segmentation? Let me tell you that, say, suppose there is a banking application, or maybe there is some stores, right, wherein there are lots of customers, and depending on the behavior or the nature or the buying capacity of the customer, or depending on the trends, what kinds of products the customers buy, depending on that, we need to group the data. We need to find certain pattern out of that data. I'll repeat. I'm having the many customers, right? Those are buying some products from some organization, or suppose it is the chain of stores, right? And the customers are buying every day, or they are buying some products from those stores. So we are having lots of information about those customers. So what kind of information we may have? We may have that what kinds of products these customers are buying. We may have the information like how much they spend per month, whether they buy the goods on credit or cash, something like that, right? So these are actually the behaviors of the customers. So based on these characteristics of the customer, these properties of the customers, we may like to group those customers. We may like to segment out those customers. This problem is called as customer segmentation. So what we may mean by that is, we may need to group similar kinds of customers together. So if the customer is having similar buying trends or similar behavior, then we would like to group that customer in one cluster. Similarly, if other customers are having, say, for example, habit to purchase the electronics goods, then those customers can be grouped together. Few of the customers are there, those are having the habit to purchase, say, home appliances. So these kinds of customers are put together, right, depending on whatever is the need. So depending on that kind of characteristics of the customers, or whatever may be the spending behavior of the customer. So some
Ma'am,
customers, yes.
but how this will help us? Means by
Yes, that
grouping
is what I
them.
am trying to explain. Please listen completely, and then if you have any doubts, then raise your doubt. So based on these characteristics, I am going to group the customers. So for example, based on the spending capacity of the customer, I may come up with certain clustering. So this group of customer is spending low, this group of customers is spending high, and one more group of customer is spending moderately, right? So depending on various criteria, I may come up with different kinds of clusters. And why actually I am doing this? Why I would like to analyze the behavior of the customer. Say, for example, I want to provide some kind of offer on electronic goods. So I am having one cluster of these customers. Those are having the habit to frequently buy that electronic products. So if I am having such kind of a cluster with me, then what I can do, I can target only those customers, because those customers are having that kind of a habit. So if I come up with some offer, and if I target those customers, then definitely it will help me to increase my business. Or if I am having the customer clusters based on their spending capacities, then obviously the customers who are having high spending capacity, I will frequently provide them certain alerts with respect to the newer products those are being introduced, so that these customers may turn up happen that my business may increase. So these are some kinds of applications wherein it is what we need to do is we need to cluster the similar kinds of data together. And the reasons are depending on the application, the reasons are many. So in this application, what is the reason? The reason is to increase my business. So if I target only that group of customers, then it will help me a lot. So I am trying to reduce my efforts and I am trying to increase my business. If I am having billions of customers and if few of the customers are not at all interested in buying the electronic goods, so there is no point in sending some alerts for the offers or something like that to those customers. So I need not invest my efforts in those customers because these customers are not at all interested or very less interested, right? So this is how to come up with some business logics. We may use such kinds of clustering algorithms, and to assess the performance of our clustering algorithms, we are having these two performance metrics. So I hope you might have understood the reason why we are using such kinds of unsupervised clustering algorithms. Still, if you have any doubt, please let me know.
I got it, ma'am.
Got it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So somebody was having one problem. So now speak up if you have any problems. May I proceed? Yes. May I proceed?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. So we have covered now these performance evaluation metrics, and you must have understood now how important those performance metrics are to assess the performance of our model, right? And always we would like to maximize the performance of our model. So depending on the application, depending on the problem statement, we should pick the appropriate performance metrics, right? And we should proceed with our task. Now, the next point that we are going to cover is regarding the data splitting of the data set. So what we mean by that? We are having, so whenever we are building any machine learning application, right, then we are having some data provided initially. So we are having some finite data available with us, right? And what actually we need to do is we need to use the same data for training as well as testing or validation, right? Say suppose I'm having provided with 1000 samples of some kind. Suppose I'm having the problem, classification problem, right? And suppose I want to diagnose whether there is a disease or not. And if I'm provided with 1000 examples describing 1000 patients, right? And I want to find out whether the patient is deceased or not deceased, right? So if I'm having this finite data with me available, 100 samples, then those 1000 samples. So those 1000 samples I need to use for training as well as testing or validation, maybe. Okay. So what is important is whatever I'm having the data set available, I need to split that data set into training data set or testing data set or the validation data set. So how such kind of splitting we may have, that is what we are going to discuss next. Okay. So let me tell you, if we are having more training data, then there are the chances that we may get better generalization, provided the data is not having the significant amount of noise. I'll repeat. If I'm having more training data, then there are the chances that we are getting a generalized model, right? Or it is possible to have better generalization, provided the data that we are having is not having much noise into that. Okay. Now, what next? If I am having more test data, then it will help me to better estimate for the error probability. I'll repeat. If I am having more test data, then it would be better for me to estimate the probable errors, right? And most importantly, we should not evaluate the performance of our model on the same data that is used for training. So always what we want is the training data and the data that is being used for testing should be different. And the reason is, if we use the same training data for testing, then obviously the results would be optimistically biased, because the same data is being used for training, the same data is used for learning, right? And if the same questions are being asked, then definitely these are biased, because there are chances that we are getting the correct answers, right? But always we should evaluate the performance of our model with respect to some unseen data, some unseen samples. And that is why we should have two different data sets, training and testing, right? I'll once again repeat. Usually we are having some limited data available, and that data we are supposed to use for learning also, and for testing also, for training also, and for testing also. If we are having more training data, then there are chances that we are having better generalized model. If we are having more test data, then there is a probability that we are able to estimate the error in a good sense, right? And we should not use the same training data for testing, right? So with this background now, we are going to look at various ways how the given data can be partitioned into training data set, test data set, and sometimes we may have one more data set that is called as validation data set, right? So we are supposed to partition our available finite set of data into the data sets such as training data set, testing data set, and sometimes we may have third kind of data set, that is validation data set. So we are going to talk about such kind of splitting of the data, how we can partition the data. So there are several ways to partition the data. So I have listed out here few of the ways how we can do that. So we may have the holdout method, we may have the cross validation, we may have the bootstrap, we may have three-way data splits, right? So these are few of the methods those can be used to split our data set into several different data sets, or these are the methods those help us to partition our finite data available with us in different kinds of data sets, right? So let us look at all those methods one by one. So let's begin with the holdout method. Let's begin with the holdout method. So what this method is? Here in this method, the given data is randomly partitioned into two independent sets. So whatever is the data that has been provided, right, that is independent sets. So randomly these samples are being picked up, right? And these samples are being placed into different sets. So usually in practice, the training set is of size 2/3 of the data. Typically, I am giving you some typical statistics, right? So if I want to build one model, one regression model or classification model, then I'll be using 2/3 of the available data for training and 1/3 of available data for testing. Right? So why this method is called as holdout method? The test set is hold out for the performance estimation of the algorithm. So 1/3 data is set aside. It is not being used for training. So if, say for example, if I am having 1000 examples in my data set, how many data samples I am having? 1000. So what I will do, I will pick 2/3 of those samples, 2/3 of those samples. So approximately how many samples? 667 samples. 2/3 of these samples will be utilized for training. Okay, and remaining 333 samples are being used for testing. So 1/3 samples. So this 1/3 samples are hold out to assess the performance of my classifier or my algorithm in general. Right? So this is how the holdout method works. These are the typical statistics. 2/3 data is being used for training and 1/3 data is being used for testing. Right? And these samples are being randomly picked up from the given data set. And we are going to form two independent data sets, training data set and test data set. So training data set typically is having the size 2/3 of data and test data set is having the size approximately 1/3 of data. So these are the typical ways how we can partition, but not necessarily always the people are using this statistics 2/3 and 1/3. Sometimes the people are using say 60-40 partitioning, 60% of the data for training, 40% of the data for testing. Right? It may also happen that the people are using 70% of the data for training, 30% data for testing. Sometimes even people may use 80% of the data for training and 20% of the data for testing. So it depends. But typically the partitioning is like 2/3 of the data for training and 1/3 of the data for testing. But there are other possible methods or other possible ways of partitioning the data are available. Not necessarily 2/3 and 1/3. 60-40 you may have, 70-30 you may have, 80-20 you may have, or even in some situations people are using 90-10 also. Right? So it depends. Are you getting me? Yes,
ma'am.
Okay. Now, random sampling is sometimes a variation of the holdout method. So what we mean by this random sampling, I'm going to explain you. There are several drawbacks of holdout methods. So what are those drawbacks of holdout method? See, for example, if we are having very limited data set, there are several applications wherein it is not possible for us to have enough data so that we can partition that data in trend set and test set. So in the problems where we have a sparse data set having very few samples, we may not be able to afford this luxury of setting aside a portion of the data set for testing. Right? So it is not possible to keep aside some set of data for testing, because actually the data set that we have is very small. And if we pick few samples from that data and we keep it aside, then it may not be possible with respect to that small data set, right? So that is one kind of limitation of such kind of holdout method. What else? In holdout method, initially we are splitting our data in train set and test set, right? So the single train and test experiment that we are going to perform. So a single training data set is being used for training or learning, and a single test data set that we have prepared that is being used for evaluating the performance of my system, right? So if I am performing such kind of a single experiment with my data and my algorithm, then the holdout estimate of error rate may mislead, right? If it happens that this splitting is not well defined. So what I mean by that, I'm just going to provide you one example. Whenever we are going to split this data, training and testing data, what is important? See, this is really very obvious. Whenever we are partitioning the data, in my training set, I should have the samples belonging to all the classes. I'll repeat. Whenever I'm partitioning the data should be partitioned such that my data, training data, should have the samples, those belonging to all the classes, right? And similarly, whenever I'm testing the data, I must have the samples belonging to all the classes. So while partitioning also, we need to take care that whenever we say that we are randomly picking up the samples, right, we need to make sure that my training data set comprises of the samples those belong to all the classes present in my data set, and similarly the testing data set should also have the samples belonging to all the classes. Otherwise the performance evaluation may not be correct. Or if in my training set there is dominance of a particular class, then obviously my algorithm will try to learn more about that class, and the other class for which I am having very few samples, then that class can be ignored by my algorithm. So this should not happen. So we should always have a good balance of all the classes in training data set especially. Okay, so if unfortunately if we are not having such kind of a good training data set and good test data set, then sometimes as we are having only one experiment with training and testing data sets using this holdout method, sometimes it may happen that we are not able to report the correct estimate of the error because we are experimenting only once, right? So to overcome these problems, we may come up with the solutions. And what are the solutions? We may have the random sampling with holdout. So in this, what we do is, instead of having only the training set, one training set and one test set, we go on repeat this holdout process k times. So k times we are picking up our training set and we are picking up our test set, and that would be first experiment. Next time, once again randomly I'll be sampling my training data set and my test data set. So I'm able to shuffle my samples in between training and test data sets. So once again, with this set of training data and the test data, I'll be repeating my experiment second time. So this is how I may repeat the holdout k times and I may repeat my experiment k times, and ultimately I'll be finding out the average of the accuracies those I have got out of these k experiments, and then I will report the final outcome, right, of my model. So this is one way. Other ways are, we may come up with cross validation, that is the another way of data splitting that we are going to focus upon, or we may come up with bootstrapping, or even we may come up with another strategy, that is having 3 different data sets instead of 2. So instead of having only the trained data set and test data set, we may additionally have the validation data set. So these are the various methods those we may use to overcome the drawbacks of this holdout method, right? So what are the drawbacks of holdout method? Just I mentioned. Anybody who can repeat? Yes, drawbacks of holdout method. Anybody who can repeat the drawbacks of holdout method? Yes. Have you understood? Or you want to repeat me?
Repeat, ma'am.
Repeat. Repeat,
Okay.
ma'am.
So, what we mentioned in holdout method, we are having one training set and one test set. Training set is being used for learning. Test set is being used for evaluating the performance. Have you understood till this?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, what is the typical drawback of this holdout method? We are having one training set and we are having one test set, right? So, if I am performing this experiment only once, right? Then what will happen? If unfortunately, if my data set is not partitioned well initially in this training set and test set, then there is a possibility, right, that I may come up with the estimate of the error that is actually misleading. Why? Because I have experimented with only one set of training and test. One set of experiment only. Right? And that is why sometimes if in this holdout method, whatever is my partitioning of the data, training and test, it may happen sometimes that that partitioning is not the ideal partitioning. Right? So if this happens and if I'm performing the experiment only once, then it may happen that the result or the error rate may mislead. Right? So that is one drawback. And the second drawback is sometimes our data, provided data, is sparse. That means we are having very few samples in my original data set, and I may not have the freedom actually to partition the data into train set and test set, because originally my samples are very few. So it will not make sense to partition that data, because initially the count of the samples is very few. So how many samples to use for training and how many samples to use for testing, that will not make sense, right, to evaluate the performance of my model. So that is another drawback. So two drawbacks. One is if my data set is very small, right, then I cannot afford to hold out some part of the data as test set, because I'm not having those many samples with me, so that I can have this partitioning of training and test data set and I come up with good results. That is one drawback. Second drawback, as I mentioned, what is the second drawback? With this strategy, we are experimenting only once with one set of training data and one set of test data. And if by chance it happens that we have not having the good partitioning of the data, train set and test set, the samples in the training set and the samples in the test set are not the representative samples for all the classes present. If it happens, then such kind of a model and the performance estimation may mislead the results, right? So these are the two drawbacks of holdout method. And if I want to overcome these drawbacks, I need to have some additional methods. And that is why sometimes I may come up with the random sampling method. So what is this random sampling method? Instead of having only one experiment, I'll be having k experiments. So what I mean by k experiments? Instead of having only one time partitioning of training set and test set, I will repeat this holdout method for k times. And every time as I am picking up randomly my samples, every time the samples in my training set and the samples in my test set may differ. So I may have variety of the training sets and test sets. So if I am having such procedure repeated for k times, then obviously I'll be having k holdouts, and if I perform experiments k times, then every time I'll be getting some accuracy of my model. So ultimately what I can do is I can have average of those accuracies, right? And I'll report that average of the accuracy as the average of my model. Have you got the concept? Or any doubt? Yes?
No, ma'am.
Got the concept?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this is one solution, that is random sampling with k times holdout, application of holdout k times, or we may have other solutions also. Those are cross validation and bootstrapping or three-way splitting, right? So one by one we are going to discuss about those methods. Those will help us actually in partitioning the data set, right? And these are really good methods to evaluate the performance of our system. Okay, how to partition the data. So let me give you few important steps in holdout method, right? So pictorially it would be more useful for you to understand the concept. So this is the holdout method or the steps in the holdout method. So what we have, we are having some data initially provided. So we are having the data along with the labels, right? So in holdout method, what we do, typically we partition this original set into train set and test set. And how we are going to partition? Usually the 2/3 of the data is being used as training and 1/3 of the data is used for testing. So now in my training data set, I am having some samples, 2/3 of the samples along with the labels. In my test data set, I'll be having 1/3 of the samples along with the labels, right? So this is how we have partitioned our data. What next? What next we are going to do? Now our training data set is ready with us. So we are going to make use of that training data. We are having selected our learning algorithm, right? And this learning algorithm is having some hyperparameter values. We are going to discuss later what we mean by hyperparameter values, but these are the parameters. Hyperparameters are the parameters. Those are being used, right, to tune our algorithms, right? So say for example, if I'm using k nearest neighbors, this is one of the algorithms for classification. K nearest neighbors, or rather it is known as KNN. So K stands for some number, right? So this value of this parameter K need to be set manually initially, right? So the hyperparameter values are the parameters, those we need to set initially, usually manually. What would be the best value of K that I need to set earlier? Okay, so such kinds of hyperparameter values we need to provide for the learning algorithm. So here in this scenario, let us assume that my learning algorithm is KNN algorithm and the hyperparameter value is the value of K that is being provided. Okay, so by making use of this learning algorithm along with this training data, I am preparing the model. Right? So this learning algorithm will learn this data and prepare the model. Okay. Now, what next? After preparing the model, the test data that we have set aside, that test data is being presented to the model. Okay. Now, whenever this test data is being presented, this model will predict the labels for this test data. So this is my prediction. Okay. And already I am having the original test labels with me. So based on the predicted labels and the test labels, I'll be finding out the performance of my model. Right? So this is the third step. And in the fourth step, what usually we do is, now once our model is ready, here, right, we have presented test data, we have computed the performance, right, and if the performance is satisfactory, we say that this model is good enough. Otherwise, what we do, we try to set the parameters once again, we try to tune the parameters and we come up with another model, right? So once we have finalized the model, once we are getting the satisfied performance, then what in the next step we do is, whatever is our original data. So once again, whatever is the original data, we are going to make use of that data, right? Whole data, entire data, and then we are going to prepare the final model, right? So initially, and I'm repeating, my data was there. Here I have partitioned my data in training set and test set. Training set is being used for learning and I have prepared the model. Whatever my model is, I'm using that model, I'm using test data, right, and I'm evaluating the performance. Once I have done with this, what in the fourth step I'm doing? Once again, I'm making use of the entire data, train and test, entire data, right, once again. And I will present all that data to my system and finally I come up with my final model with the same parameters, those I have provided, right? And whatever is this final model, okay, I'll be using this final model further for real-time samples. Those are being presented to my model and for which I would like to predict the output. So this is how this holdout method works. Okay, so I hope you must have understood this method. We are going to focus upon few more methods in the next session. So this is the very first method, very preliminary basic method of partitioning the data and carrying out the task of learning. If you have any doubts, please let me know. Yes? Any doubts? Any doubts?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Okay, so let us conclude the session today. In the next session, we'll be focusing upon few more such methods for splitting the data. right? And that is really very interesting because practically we need to make use of these methods. Okay, so let's stop today. I'll be posting the link for the quiz. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next session.